Before the world as we know it began, before time itself ticked forward, there existed the infinite and perfect realm of the unseen. There, in the presence of the divine, the first of creation emerged by the command of Allah. From light, pure, and without blemish, were born the angels. Unlike mankind, they had no desires, no will to disobey, and no blood coursing through their bodies. They were beings of service, agents of the Most High, created only to obey, to worship, and to fulfill their celestial tasks. Among them was one whose light outshone the others. His name was Jibreel, created with tremendous beauty, immense power, and a spirit of absolute devotion. Jibreel was unlike any other angel in stature or responsibility. While all angels serve, Jibreel was chosen for a role of unmatched importance. He was to be the messenger of the divine word, the trusted bearer of revelation, from the Creator to his chosen prophets across the ages. Even in a realm untouched by sin or corruption, Jibreel stood apart. His radiance was overwhelming. The number of his wings was beyond counting in earthly terms, and when he spread them, horizons vanished behind their breadth. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, once described having seen Jibreel in his full form, filling the sky from edge to edge, with 600 wings each adorned with precious jewels. Yet for all his might and glory, he was known not for arrogance but for humility. He existed only to serve. Jibreel's presence in the divine order is deeply rooted in the cosmic balance. He was among the highest of the angels, entrusted with responsibilities that touch the fate of both angels and men. He stood near the throne of Allah, the magnificent Arsh, from which all commands were issued and decrees written. It was from this exalted position that he would descend through the layers of the heavens, carrying with him the words of God destined for the hearts of prophets. No other being in creation had access to such closeness to divine light, and simultaneously bore such a tremendous duty. In those early epochs, before the creation of mankind, Jibreel was already active in fulfilling divine orders. He descended to various realms, executed decrees, and bore witness to the unfolding will of the Creator. The stories of Adam and Iblis, of the gardens of Jannah, and the warnings given to rebellious creations, all passed through the knowledge or hand of Jibreel. He did not act of his own volition. He had no desire to. He simply obeyed, with perfect clarity and unshakable purpose. Unlike humans, who question, doubt, and struggle with submission, Jibreel was fashioned to understand submission as the essence of his being. Every breath of his existence resonated with remembrance of the divine. When Allah created Adam, Jibreel was there. He witnessed the shaping of the first human from clay, the honor bestowed upon Adam by the command for the angels to bow, and the fall of Iblis, who refused. Jibreel did not question. He bowed as commanded, and in that bow, there was not just obedience, but recognition of divine wisdom. Jibreel's role was not one of glory-seeking or personal ambition. He did not act to be seen or to be praised. He acted because Allah commanded. Whether he was sent with messages of mercy or with the execution of divine punishment, he never wavered. He carried divine justice with the same precision as he did divine compassion. This perfect submission made him the most trustworthy of messengers, the one to whom even the prophets would look with awe and reverence. Though he was crafted from light, it was not mere brightness that made Jibreel feared or respected. It was his intensity. His presence altered the atmosphere around him. The skies would shift when he descended. The hearts of men trembled when they saw him in his true form. Yet he was not cruel. He did not wield his power for dominance. Instead, he carried it as a trust. His very essence was duty. In that duty, there was no deviation. In his loyalty, there was no doubt. The relationship between Jibreel and the throne of Allah was one of proximity and service. He was among the bearers of knowledge who operated beneath the throne. The throne itself, whose vastness surpasses human comprehension, is a place of divine command, and from beneath it, Jibreel would receive his instructions. Each command that passed from Allah to his messengers on earth came through Jibreel. He was the bridge, the divine connection, the unseen channel between the highest and the lowest realms. Jibreel was not alone in his stature. Alongside him stood other archangels, each with their own roles. Michael oversaw sustenance, sending rain and managing provision. Israfil would one day blow the trumpet, heralding the end of time and the day of judgment. Azrael would take the souls of the living at their appointed time. Yet among these mighty beings, Jibreel's role touched the hearts of prophets and shaped the destinies of nations. For while sustenance nourishes the body and death takes the soul, revelation nourishes the spirit, guides the heart, and connects creation to its creator. The heavenly world was not without its own structure and order. Angels moved in vast arrays. Some stood in eternal ruku, bowing without pause. Others praised with voices that echoed across the cosmos. Some guarded the gates of heaven, others recorded deeds, but Jibreel moved among them with a different purpose. He was often alone in his descent to earth, chosen to bring the word of Allah to one specific soul, at one specific moment, ordained from the beginning of time. His descent was never random. Every movement was precise. Every revelation was timed perfectly. And with each mission, Jibreel maintained a purity of intent unmatched in all creation. He never altered a single word. He never delayed a single moment. His voice, if heard by a prophet, would shake the very core of their being, not because it was harsh, but because it carried the weight of eternity. The voice of Jibreel bore the weight of truth. This being of light, this servant of the Most High, would go on to touch the lives of the greatest prophets, deliver the holiest of scriptures, and stand as a silent witness to the unfolding of divine will on earth. His story does not begin with mankind, nor will it end with them. Jibreel's story is one of eternal duty, transcendent trust, and an unbroken chain of obedience that reflects the perfection of the one who created him. Long before the final prophet walked the earth, Jibreel had already become deeply woven into the story of humanity. His presence was not sudden, nor was it limited to a single time or place. Rather, Jibreel's mission was continuous, enduring, and vast, stretching across generations and civilizations. He was not simply a figure who emerged during the life of Prophet Muhammad. He had long been active, fulfilling his divine commission of delivering revelation and guidance to the prophets who came before. In the earliest chapters of human history, when the earth was still young and humanity was just beginning to shape its destiny, Jibreel was already descending from the higher realms to convey messages from the Creator to his chosen servants. The first of these was Adam. As the first human and prophet, Adam received guidance directly from his Lord, and Jibreel was the conduit through which this wisdom was often delivered. Though the details of these early interactions are shrouded in mystery, it is clear that Jibreel was there, watching and participating in the unfolding drama of mankind's emergence from paradise to earth. When Adam and Hawa were sent down to the earth, bewildered and remorseful, it was Jibreel who helped guide them to the means of repentance. The divine mercy that allowed Adam to seek forgiveness was conveyed through Jibreel, who became a symbol not only of communication but of hope and divine clemency. Though the gates of paradise had closed behind them, the gates of guidance had opened, and Jibreel stood at that threshold. Generations passed, and with the spread of humanity came the need for renewed messages. One of the most significant prophets to emerge was Idris. Known for his deep wisdom and knowledge of the heavens, Idris was among those granted a special relationship with the celestial world. The Quran briefly alludes to his elevated status, and traditions speak of his ascension to the heavens. Jibreel was intimately involved in this journey. He accompanied Idris on his ascent, showing him the workings of the skies, the ranks of angels, and the unseen laws that governed creation. Idris's elevation, both physical and spiritual, came by way of Jibreel's companionship. Their journey was not only through space but through understanding, as Jibreel revealed to Idris the nature of divine decree and the responsibility of sacred knowledge. As time moved forward and corruption spread among the people, Allah sent Nuh to his nation. Nuh's story is one of perseverance and pain, of calling his people day and night for centuries without success. Throughout these long years, Jibreel remained by his side, providing the words, the strength, and the assurance that Nuh's struggle was not in vain. The command to build the ark, the warnings of the coming flood, and the eventual destruction of a disbelieving people were all elements that passed through the hands of Jibreel. Though the people scoffed and mocked, the angel who bore the truth did not waver. He stood with Nu until the final drop of rain fell, and the waters swallowed the earth. With each prophet, Jibreel's presence continued. He appeared not only as a messenger, but sometimes as a silent observer, as a guide, and occasionally as an agent of divine intervention. When Ibrahim was thrown into the fire by his people for rejecting their idols, it was Jibreel who descended swiftly, offering to intervene and extinguish the flames. Ibrahim, in his absolute trust in Allah, declined the angel's assistance, saying that Allah alone was sufficient for him. Even so, the fire became cool and peaceful by the will of Allah, and Jibreel stood nearby, witnessing the miracle unfold. Later in Ibrahim's life, Jibreel returned again and again, guiding him through trials that would shape the foundations of faith. He came with news of the birth of Ishaq, a son promised in old age. He walked alongside Ibrahim on his journey to Makkah, where the barren desert would become the cradle of a great nation. He appeared during the near sacrifice of Ismail, delivering the command to replace the boy with a ram. In all of these moments, Jibreel did not act as a passive figure. He was the bridge between heaven and earth, the reminder that Allah was always near. Jibreel also played a decisive role in the destruction of nations that had transgressed beyond redemption. When the people of Lut became steeped in sin and defiance, their punishment was sealed. Jibreel, along with other angels, visited Ibrahim first, informing him of the impending doom. Then they proceeded to Lut's town, disguised as travelers. Jibreel was there when the people surrounded Lut's house, driven by their wickedness. And when the hour came for punishment, it was Jibreel who struck the land with such force that the cities were turned upside down. It is said that he used only the tip of a single wing to lift the towns and drop them back to the earth. The screams of the people were drowned out by divine judgment, and the earth bore silent witness to their end. Despite these moments of wrath, Jibreel's most frequent role was that of mercy. His descent signaled divine attention and care. Every time a prophet felt isolated or burdened by the weight of their mission, Jibreel brought reassurance. He reminded them that they were never alone, that their efforts were seen and their words were heard. His voice was not his own, but it carried the weight of the eternal truth. It carried verses and commands, promises and warnings, comforts and certainties. The trust between Jibreel and the prophets was unbreakable. They knew that he came not with personal opinions, but with the speech of the one who knows all things. Even in the darkest hours, the flicker of hope returned when Jibreel appeared. Sometimes he came visibly, sometimes in dreams, sometimes only as an unseen whisper of revelation in the heart. But always he came with purpose. Through these centuries of labor and light, Jibreel never questioned, never erred, never faltered. He carried out his role with perfect precision and unwavering fidelity. The scrolls he brought to Idris, the commands given to Nu, the visions shown to Ibrahim, the warnings delivered to Lut, and the messages whispered to countless other prophets all passed through the same hands. Those hands were neither stained with sin nor shaken by doubt. This continuity of divine message, passed down through one trusted bearer, was what maintained the thread of truth through human history. Though each prophet had their own time and people, their source was the same. The one who carried the message was the same, and the one who sent the message was eternally the same. In every era, among every nation, Jibreel walked beside those chosen to lead. He was their companion when the world turned its back on them. He was the first to bring them news of divine election, and he remained until their mission was complete. His footprints are not found in the sands of time, but his presence echoes in the stories that shaped humanity. Through him the word moved, through him the heavens reached the earth, and through him the chain of revelation continued, unbroken and pure, until it reached its final link. Maryam lived in quiet devotion. From her earliest years, she was known among her people for her purity, her silence, and her continuous prayer. She had been dedicated to the service of the temple by her mother before she was even born, and she grew up under the care of Zechariah, a prophet and a guardian who marveled at her faith. She spent her days in worship, isolated from worldly distractions, and surrounded only by the unseen presence of angels. Food would appear before her without explanation, sustenance from a source unseen, and when Zachariah questioned her about it, she would reply that it was from her Lord. She did not complain of solitude, nor did she tire of worship. She was content in her silence, in her remembrance of God, and in the quiet strength that grew within her heart. It was during one of these moments of solitude that her life changed forever. Without warning, without sound, the chamber where she worshipped, filled with a presence so overwhelming that the very air shifted around her. There before her stood a man. She did not recognize him, and his sudden appearance terrified her. She recoiled, seeking protection in the name of the Most Merciful, thinking perhaps she was in danger. But this man was no ordinary figure. His face carried no malice. His voice, when he spoke, brought not harm but calm. He identified himself not as a man, but as a messenger from her Lord. He was Jibreel. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Maryam, known for her modesty and chastity, was confronted with the unimaginable. Jibreel told her that he had been sent by God to give her a pure son. She was stunned. She had never been touched by a man. She had never so much as stepped beyond the bounds of chastity. How could she possibly bear a child? Her question was not one of disbelief, but one of genuine confusion, the kind of honest wonder that any faithful servant might feel when confronted with a divine miracle that shattered the normal order of things. Jibreel answered with clarity. It would be so because her Lord had willed it. The decree had already been issued. Her womb would carry a child, not by the union of man and woman, but by the command of the one who says to a thing, "Be," and it is. This was not to be a punishment or a burden, but a sign for her people, a sign for the world, and a mercy from God. With that, Jibreel breathed into her. It was not a breath as humans know it. It was the delivery of a divine spark, a command wrapped in grace. Maryam felt it settle within her, and from that moment, she knew that her life had forever changed. Jibreel did not remain. His purpose had been fulfilled. He vanished from sight, returning to the unseen realm, leaving Maryam to carry the weight of what had been placed inside her. She withdrew even further from society, feeling the changes within her body, watching life grow where no life should have been possible. She did not speak of it. She knew what people would say. They would not understand. They would accuse. They would condemn. Yet she remained steadfast, trusting that the same Lord who had sent her this miracle would not abandon her to the cruelty of men. The time came when she could no longer hide. She left her place of worship and traveled alone, seeking shelter and solace. Her labor was difficult. Pain consumed her, and in her desperation, she cried out, wishing that she had died before this moment, wishing to be forgotten, to be hidden from the eyes of those who would judge her. But even then, in that moment of despair, mercy arrived. A voice called out to her, telling her not to grieve, showing her a stream that had sprung beneath her and a palm tree that would bend and drop fresh dates for her to eat. Some say that this voice was from Isa himself, still unborn but already speaking by divine command. Others believe it was Jibreel, once more returning to her side in her hour of need. She gave birth alone, surrounded by no one, supported only by the unseen help of her Lord. And in her arms, she held a son, a child of perfect purity, a sign of mercy and power, a soul destined to speak from the cradle and call his people to truth. She returned to her people holding Isa close. They were shocked. They could not understand. They demanded an explanation. But Maryam, obedient to the command she had received, said nothing. Instead, she pointed to the infant in her arms. Isa spoke, not with the gurgling voice of a newborn, but with the clarity of a prophet. He declared himself a servant of God, a prophet sent with guidance and blessing. His first words silenced the crowd and confirmed Maryam's innocence. The miracle was undeniable. The truth had spoken from the lips of a child. Though Jibreel's visible role in Maryam's life may have seemed brief, its impact was eternal. He had been the one chosen to deliver the news of her motherhood, to carry the breath that would become Isa, and to assure her that what was happening was not shameful, but sanctified. His presence marked the beginning of a chapter that would ripple through history, affecting not only Maryam and her son, but generations to come. Jibreel's involvement with Isa did not end with his birth. He remained a presence in the life of the prophet, though often unseen. He was there in times of trial, in moments when Isa would call upon the heavens for strength, and when the time came for Isa to be lifted from the earth, spared from the hands of those who sought to crucify him, Jibreel was among the angels who surrounded him. The exact details of that ascent remain veiled, but what is clear is that Isa was not abandoned, and Jibreel, as always, stood close to those chosen by God. The story of Maryam and Jibreel is one of trust, of divine will working through human vulnerability. It is a story that defies the limits of reason and affirms the boundless power of the Creator. Jibreel did not argue, did not hesitate. He brought the command and carried it out with perfect precision. Maryam, for her part, responded with faith, even when the weight of the world threatened to crush her. Together, the angel and the maiden became part of a chapter that would echo forever in the sacred texts and in the hearts of those who believe. The child they brought into the world would speak of mercy, heal the sick, and return again before the end of time. And at the beginning of that story stood Jibreel, the messenger of light, delivering the word that would change the course of history. After Isa was lifted from the earth, a silence fell over the world that would last for centuries. The last of the prophets had ascended, and no new revelation came. The people continued their lives, building kingdoms, waging wars, and following paths of their own making. The remnants of earlier guidance remained, scattered among scriptures that were read and debated, but the connection between heaven and earth no longer opened in the same way. Yet in the unseen realm, the work of the angels continued. The divine order did not pause, and among those who remained in constant service was Jibreel. He did not cease his duties, for the angel who delivers the word does not vanish when the word stops being sent. Instead, his mission took on a different shape. In this time of waiting, Jibreel was not idle. He moved through the heavens, fulfilling tasks known only to him and to the one who commanded them. He bore witness to the deeds of men, listened to the prayers of the righteous, and stood at the gates of mercy, awaiting the next command. Among the angels, Jibreel remained a figure of unmatched authority and reverence. Though each angel had a specific role, there was none among them who did not acknowledge Jibreel's closeness to the throne and his legacy in delivering divine revelation. The angels do not age or forget, and they remember every verse, every command, every time Jibreel descended to earth carrying the light of guidance. His wings, folded in patience during these quiet years, still shimmered with the remnants of every verse he had ever delivered. His heart, if it can be called that, beat with the rhythm of obedience, unwavering and calm. In these years between Isa and the Prophet Muhammad, the earth moved forward without a prophet to guide it directly. People lived and died, often unaware that the world stood in a quiet anticipation of something monumental. Among them were individuals who continued to seek the truth. Some prayed in solitude. Others walked away from the idols their people worshipped, feeling deep within that there must be more than stone and ritual. Though these seekers did not know it, their yearning was not ignored. The angels, including Jibreel, observed them. Nothing is lost in the sight of the heavens. Every moment of sincerity, every whisper of a heart turned toward truth, was noticed and remembered. There were times during these centuries when Jibreel was sent with missions other than revelation. He would deliver protection to certain souls, bring dreams to those whose hearts were open, or assist other angels in fulfilling their tasks. In this period, his role shifted from direct communication with prophets to a more subtle participation in the unseen workings of the world. He did not bring scripture, but he remained a servant of divine decree. The trust placed in him had not diminished, only waited for the right moment to awaken again in full force. It is said among some that Jibreel and the other archangels would gather near the throne and speak of what was to come. Though they do not question the will of their Lord, the angels know what is written in the preserved tablet. They understand the significance of certain events and the arrival of certain souls. Jibreel, who had carried the word to Adam, to Nuh, to Ibrahim, to Musa, and to Isa, knew that another prophet was destined to arrive. He knew that this final messenger would not only receive revelation but would bring with him the completion of all that had come before. The angels waited. Jibreel remained ready. His time of revelation was not over, only paused. The divine plan moved slowly by human standards, but for the angels, whose lives stretch across the entirety of time, the pause was a breath held between verses. Jibreel did not grow weary. He did not wonder. He continued in his obedience, never failing in his purpose, even as the world below forgot what it meant to hear the voice of a prophet. Among the people of Arabia, the land where the final message would descend, there were signs that the time was approaching. The keepers of earlier scriptures spoke quietly of a prophet to come. Poets, dreamers, and wanderers felt a shift in the air, though they could not name it. The Kaaba remained in Mecca, its original purpose long obscured by idol worship, but its presence still anchored something deep in the earth's spiritual fabric. In the mountains, in the deserts, in the silence of the night, the earth seemed to listen for a call that had not yet come. Jibreel watched. He knew that soon he would descend again, not just once, but repeatedly, over many years. He knew the one he would visit had not yet received the command, but was nearing the moment when his heart would be prepared. The Prophet Muhammad was still a young man, working in the markets, walking the streets of Mecca, and reflecting deeply on the confusion and injustice he saw around him. But within him was a heart untouched by the darkness that surrounded his people, and that heart, pure and yearning, would soon be opened by a single word from above. Though unseen by the people of the earth, Jibreel was closer than they could imagine. His return was not a matter of chance. It had been written long ago, and the weight of what he would bring had already been sealed. The revelation that was to come would not be one scroll, nor a single message, but a living book that would descend over 23 years. And Jibreel would be the one to carry every verse, every syllable, every command, with the same unwavering precision he had shown for millennia. This time of waiting, of apparent silence, was not empty. It was a moment of preparation. The world was being readied. The heavens stood poised. And Jibreel, bearer of light and guardian of truth, remained in his station, alert and obedient, waiting for the signal that would break the silence and begin the final chapter of his mission on earth. When that command came, he would not hesitate. He never had. The pause would end. The word would move again, and Jibreel would once more become the bridge between the eternal and the mortal. In the stillness of the cave of Hira, the world was about to change forever. A man sat alone in deep reflection, his heart full of questions, his soul longing for clarity. This man, known to his people as Muhammad, had turned away from the practices of his society. He had watched for years as his people bowed to idols of stone, as wealth and power drowned out justice, and as the poor and weak were left behind. He was known for his honesty and kindness, for his gentleness and sense of fairness, yet he carried a weight within him that no one around him could understand. It was the weight of a seeker. He would often climb the mountain and sit in that cave, away from the noise of the city, away from the expectations of his tribe, listening not to voices, but to the silence. He did not know what he was waiting for, only that something in him could not rest. It was in that silence, one night during the month of Ramadan, that the sky opened. He did not hear footsteps, nor did he sense a presence creeping into the cave. It happened all at once. A figure stood before him, magnificent and terrifying, taking up the space with a power that could not be described. The man's heart raced, his breath caught in his throat. The figure moved closer, closer than comfort would allow, and wrapped him in a grip that was not cruel but firm, unrelenting, and commanding. "Read." The voice filled the cave, and it was like thunder held inside a single word. Muhammad, stunned and shaking, replied that he could not read. The figure pressed again, holding him tighter, then released him. "Read." Again, Muhammad said he could not. The command came a third time, stronger than before, and then the words flowed, not from the man's memory but through his heart, planted as though they had always belonged there. Read in the name of your Lord who created man from a clot. Read, and your Lord is the most generous, who taught by the pen, taught man what he did not know. With these words, the seal of revelation had been broken, and the long silence between heaven and earth was over. The figure before him was not a man. It was Jibreel, the archangel who had carried the word of God to every prophet before him. Now he had come again, bearing not a scroll but the first verse of a book that would change the course of history. Muhammad stumbled out of the cave, his heart pounding, his body trembling. He descended the mountain, unsure of what had just happened, filled with awe and fear. The world around him looked the same, but nothing felt the same. When he reached his home, he went straight to his wife Khadija and asked to be covered. She wrapped him in cloth and held him until he calmed. Then he told her what he had seen, what he had heard, and what had shaken him to his very soul. Khadija did not question his sanity. She knew the kind of man he was. She took him to someone who could help explain what had happened, a wise elder named Waraka, who had studied the scriptures of earlier prophets. When he heard what Muhammad described, Waraka's face grew serious. He said that the one who had come to him was the same spirit who had come to Musa. He told Muhammad that he would be rejected by his people and driven from his home. The young prophet could barely comprehend this. He was loved by his people, respected even by those who disagreed with him. But Waraka was right. The road ahead would be difficult. Jibreel did not return immediately. Days passed, then weeks. The silence was deafening. The initial shock turned into a kind of sorrow, a fear that perhaps it had all been a dream, or worse, that he had been abandoned. But then, without warning, the sky opened again. This time, Jibreel filled the entire horizon. Wherever Muhammad turned his eyes, he saw the angel's presence. The moment was overwhelming. The same voice returned, reciting verses of reassurance, calling him once again to rise and warn, to speak the truth, to deliver the message. The early days of revelation were heavy. Each time Jibreel came, the weight of the message would press upon Muhammad in ways both physical and spiritual. His body would sweat, even on cold days. He would feel the strain in his chest, the pull of divine speech shaping the contours of his soul. But there was also peace in it, a calm that came after the words were received, a stillness that confirmed their origin. Jibreel became a companion, not in the sense of one who walked beside him in the open, but in the deeper sense of one who remained present in unseen ways. He would come with verses of the Quran, sometimes in response to events, sometimes to explain matters unknown, sometimes simply to strengthen the prophet's heart. He did not speak his own opinions. He was not a counselor who offered suggestions. He was a vessel of pure command, a bearer of revelation who came only when sent and left only when his task was complete. Sometimes he would appear in the form of a man, dressed in white with no signs of travel, his presence clean and composed. On one occasion, he appeared before the prophet and his companions, asking questions about faith, about submission, about excellence in worship. When he left, the prophet explained to his companions that it had been Jibreel, come to teach them their religion in the form of a questioner. Other times, he came in visions or dreams. And sometimes, his presence was known only by the sudden descent of verses into the prophet's heart, without visible form or sound. In those early days, the prophet would often return from receiving revelation shaken, not because he doubted the truth, but because of the immense responsibility it carried. Jibreel never lessened the burden, but he carried it with him in a way that made it bearable. The prophet knew he was not alone. He knew that when the verses came, when the people rejected him, when the challenges rose before him like mountains, Jibreel was there, silent perhaps, but near. As more verses were revealed, the circle of believers grew. The Quran was not delivered all at once. It came over 2 decades, piece by piece, shaped by events and guidance, like a lamp lit in the darkness, each verse illuminating a new path. And every single one of those verses passed through the hands of Jibreel. From that first moment in the cave until the final words near the end of the prophet's life, Jibreel was the bridge between the eternal and the temporal. He did not speak for himself. He carried no agenda. He brought the word, preserved its purity, and departed. The Prophet Muhammad came to rely on him, not just as a messenger, but as a presence that reminded him of the divine mercy and the unwavering truth behind his mission. And so it began, with a single word, with a cave, with a man in search of meaning, and an angel who had waited for centuries to descend again. Together they opened a new chapter in the story of humanity, a chapter that would echo through hearts and centuries, reaching those who still seek, still listen, and still long to read. As the days of revelation continued, Jibreel became more than just a visitor from the heavens. He was the unseen companion of the Prophet, always near when needed, always bringing what had been commanded. The early days had been full of fear and trembling, but with time came a deepening of familiarity and reverence. Muhammad, peace be upon him, came to recognize the signs of Jibreel's arrival. Sometimes there was a sound like the ringing of a bell. Other times, a heaviness would come upon him, so intense that even his camel would feel it if he were mounted at the time. In those moments he would fall silent, his eyes lowered, and the people around him would wait as the words of the Quran descended through Jibreel's delivery verse by verse. In public life and private moments, Jibreel remained constant. He was not seen by the common people, but his influence shaped every step of the Prophet's mission. When questions arose among the believers or the disbelievers, Jibreel would come with answers from the unseen. When judgments were needed, when laws had to be set, when hearts needed comfort, the message would come, and with it, Jibreel. There was no separation between divine guidance and his presence, for he was the bearer of that guidance. The bond between the Prophet and Jibreel was unlike any bond between man and angel. While Jibreel had brought messages to many prophets before, this mission was different. The Quran was not just a collection of rulings or wisdom. It was a complete way of life. It came to mold individuals, families, and entire societies. And so Jibreel did not come once and leave. He returned, again and again, guiding the Prophet through each stage of this immense responsibility. There were times when Jibreel brought verses that uplifted and reassured. During the most difficult trials, when the Prophet faced mockery and violence, when his followers were tortured or exiled, Jibreel would come with words of comfort. When the Prophet lost his beloved wife Khadija and his uncle Abu Talib in the same year, when he stood nearly alone with grief, Jibreel brought messages that reminded him he was not forgotten. The verses spoke of patience, of the weight of prophethood, and of the eternal reward that awaited those who bore the burden with faith. Other times, Jibreel delivered commands that shaped the growing community. He brought the order for the daily prayers, the rules for charity, the ethics of trade, marriage, and justice. There was no detail too small, no matter too complex, for the guidance of revelation, and each piece was delivered with care, never rushed, always timed perfectly for the moment it was needed. During battles, Jibreel played a role not only as a messenger but as a supporter. At Badr, the first great battle between the Muslims and the Quraysh of Makkah, the Muslims were vastly outnumbered. They had few weapons and little experience. The Prophet raised his hands to the sky and pleaded for help, and help came. Jibreel descended with a company of angels, unseen by human eyes, assisting the believers. The Quran spoke of it directly, confirming that angels had joined the ranks that day, bringing both spiritual strength and divine reassurance. The believers fought with courage that seemed beyond human, and they emerged victorious. That victory changed the course of the Muslim community, and behind it stood the help of Jibreel. In the years that followed, Jibreel's presence was felt again in other critical moments. In the Battle of Uhud, where the Muslims suffered heavy losses, he was there. In the Battle of Hunain, when confusion struck the ranks, he was there. Sometimes he did not intervene with force, but his presence reminded the Prophet that the divine was always near. The victories and setbacks, the hardships and triumphs, were all part of a larger plan, and Jibreel ensured that the Prophet never lost sight of that truth. There were also moments of deep personal connection. The Prophet once asked Jibreel why he did not visit more often. In response, a verse was revealed explaining that the angel only came by the command of Allah. This reminder underscored the purity of Jibreel's role. He was not a companion by choice, but by divine instruction. Yet in that role, he carried a closeness that no other creature shared. He had seen the prophet at his weakest and at his most exalted. He had watched him cry in prayer, teach the people with gentleness, and stand firm against rejection. Jibreel was also a teacher. He instructed the prophet in how to pray, how to purify himself, how to stand in worship before the Creator. He brought the words, but also the manner in which they should be practiced. Through him, the framework of worship was revealed. Even the angel of death, Azrael, once paused before taking the soul of a believer, saying he had received instructions through Jibreel to do so gently, honoring those who had followed the guidance. Among the companions, stories circulated of Jibreel appearing in human form. Once, a man with extremely white clothes and very black hair came to the gathering of the prophet and his companions. He asked about Islam, about faith, about excellence in worship. He asked about the signs of the hour. When he left, the prophet told his companions that this was Jibreel, who had come to teach them their religion. His appearance was clean, his words clear, his demeanor commanding. In every visit, he brought purpose. As the prophet grew older and the community expanded, Jibreel's visits became less frequent. Yet when he did come, they were as significant as ever. Verses continued to shape the society of Medina, to define relations with other tribes, to establish treaties, to call for justice, and to set the standards of truth and mercy. Through it all, Jibreel remained the quiet but powerful hand delivering the living word. To the prophet, Jibreel was not merely an angel who visited. He was a reminder of the unseen world, of the constant presence of Allah's command. He was a witness to the prophet's burdens and an anchor in times of uncertainty. Through Jibreel, the prophet learned to trust that every hardship had a purpose, that every delay in revelation was part of divine wisdom, and that he was never truly alone. When others asked about Jibreel, the prophet would speak of his strength, his appearance, his loyalty. He described him as having 600 wings and as being a creation whose full form overwhelmed the horizon. But more than that, he described Jibreel as a friend, a trusted ally in the long and often lonely road of prophethood. He was the link to the heavens, the voice that brought peace to restless nights, the companion who arrived exactly when needed. Through Jibreel, the revelation was not only delivered but lived, and in every word he brought, there was a reminder of the vastness of Allah's mercy and the honor of being chosen to carry his light. Jibreel was not seen by the eyes of men, but his presence shaped the lives of millions, beginning with the one man whose heart had opened in a cave, and who now walked with revelation in his chest and the trust of the heavens in his steps. The night was still and silent. The city of Mecca lay sleeping, unaware that the boundaries between heaven and earth were about to dissolve. In the quiet of the prophet's home, the call came. It was not a dream. It was not a vision. It was a summons from the Lord of all creation. And standing there ready to accompany him was Jibreel. The prophet Muhammad awoke to find himself in the company of the archangel once more. Jibreel did not appear with wings spread across the sky as he had in past moments. This time, he came with a steed unlike any the prophet had ever seen. It was called Burak, a creature of light and speed, swifter than any wind. Its body shone, and it moved with the grace of the heavens. It was not a horse, not a mule, but something in between, created for this sacred journey alone. With Jibreel guiding him, the prophet mounted Burak, and they began the first leg of a journey that would defy every limit of the physical world. They traveled from Mecca to Jerusalem in a single stretch of time so brief that when the prophet returned, his sleeping mat was still warm. But in that brief span, the world had changed. Upon reaching Jerusalem, Jibreel led the prophet to a place where all the prophets who had come before had gathered. Ibrahim, Musa, Isa, and others stood ready. It was a moment outside time. Here was the seal of the prophet standing shoulder to shoulder with those who had paved the path before him. And it was he who led them in prayer, a sign of the completion of the divine message. Jibreel stood by silently, watching as the prophet stepped forward, his leadership in that sacred gathering confirming what the heavens already knew. The final messenger had arrived. But this was only the beginning. From Jerusalem, the journey turned skyward. Jibreel took the prophet's hand, and together they ascended. Each heaven opened with permission. At every level, they were greeted by angels who welcomed the prophet and acknowledged his status. The first heaven revealed Adam, the father of humanity. He greeted his son with love and pride. In the second, there were the cousins Isa and Yahya. The third held Yusuf, whose beauty was unmatched. Idris was in the fourth, a prophet who had already been raised to the heavens. In the fifth, the prophet met Harun, gentle and beloved by his people. The sixth brought him to Musa, who wept upon seeing Muhammad, not out of envy but from sorrow that fewer of his followers would enter paradise compared to those of this final messenger. And then they reached the seventh heaven, where Ibrahim reclined against the Beit al-Mamur, the heavenly counterpart of the Kaaba, around which 70,000 new angels circled daily, never to return again. At each stage, Jibreel was present, speaking with the gatekeepers, introducing the prophet, watching as he was welcomed by those who had come before him. Yet with every ascent, a quiet anticipation began to build. There was a point beyond which even Jibreel could not pass. The prophet sensed this, but he did not ask. He simply continued, led by the one who had always brought him clarity and guidance. Finally, they arrived at the boundary known as Sidrat al-Muntaha, the lote tree of the utmost limit. It marked the edge of creation. Beyond it, no creature could go. Not angel, not jinn, not soul. Here, Jibreel stopped. The prophet looked to him, his companion through every step of the journey, the bearer of revelation, the angel whose presence had been with him from the beginning. Jibreel looked back and spoke. "If I were to go beyond this point," he said, "I would be destroyed. This is where I stop. This is where you continue alone." It was not fear in Jibreel's voice. It was knowledge. Even the greatest of angels has a station. Beyond Sidrat al-Muntaha, only the one called to the divine audience could go. And so the prophet continued, alone, yet never truly alone, for he was now in the presence of his Lord. What passed beyond that point cannot be described fully in human words. The prophet later spoke of light, of closeness, of revelation, without the intercession of Jibreel. It was during this ascent that the 5 daily prayers were made obligatory. At first the number was 50, but when the prophet returned and met Musa, the earlier prophet advised him to return and ask for a reduction. "Your followers will not be able to bear it," Musa said. The prophet returned multiple times, each time receiving a reduction, until the number became 5. Even then, it was said that the reward would be equal to 50. The mercy of the Lord was vast, and the burden made light. Jibreel remained at the boundary, waiting. He knew the weight of what was happening beyond the veil. When the prophet returned, Jibreel resumed his place beside him. Together, they descended once more, back through the layers of heaven, back through the silence of night, and back to the earth where it had all begun. When the prophet awoke in the morning, he spoke of the journey. The people of Mecca laughed. They ridiculed him. How could someone travel from Mecca to Jerusalem and then to the heavens in a single night? Even some who had believed hesitated, but when they asked for proof, the prophet described Masjid al-Aqsa in detail, though he had never seen it before. He spoke of a caravan on its way back to Mecca, and the signs he gave were confirmed. Still, some disbelieved. Others believed more deeply than ever before. The journey of Isra and Miraj was not merely a miracle of movement. It was a confirmation. It was a sign to the prophet that he was not abandoned, that his message was divine, and that his Lord was near. For Jibreel, it was one of the most profound moments in his mission. Though he had brought the Quran and witnessed countless revelations, here he saw the one he had guided taken beyond what he himself could reach. And he did not envy or resist. He stepped back with the dignity of one who knows his place and fulfills it perfectly. From that night onward, the bond between Jibreel and the prophet remained strong, but the prophet had experienced something that no other creation had. He had been called to a place beyond light, beyond form, beyond comprehension. Jibreel, the faithful messenger, had brought him to the edge. And there, at the limit of all creation, he had waited, obedient, patient, and still. The night journey stands as a turning point, both in the life of the prophet and in the history of revelation. It was a moment when the unseen became seen, when the limits of the physical world were cast aside, and when the prophet's heart was filled with certainty that no amount of rejection or hardship could shake. And through it all, from the waking moment in Mecca to the ascent through the heavens, Jibreel was there, silent when he needed to be, present when it mattered most, always fulfilling the command with grace, precision, and perfect devotion. The years passed, and the message continued to spread. What began in the quiet of a cave had become a movement that reached cities and tribes, crossed deserts, challenged empires, and redefined the soul of a nation. The Prophet Muhammad, once a lone man calling his people to the worship of one God, now stood at the head of a growing community. Revelation had shaped laws, reformed hearts, guided leaders, and lifted the oppressed. Yet as the mission neared its completion, a different kind of heaviness settled over the prophet. It was not the strain of battle or the burden of rejection. It was the quiet sorrow that comes with knowing an end is near. Jibreel's visits became less frequent. He still came, and each time he brought verses that spoke of faith, justice, forgiveness, or reminders of the hereafter. But the intervals between his arrivals grew longer. The prophet, who had once waited anxiously for every word from the heavens, now understood the rhythm of revelation. It had come when needed, always perfectly timed, but now it was slowing. The silence was not empty. It carried with it the feeling of closure, like the final pages of a long letter written over 2 decades. One day, the prophet stood before his followers during the farewell pilgrimage. The plains of Arafat were filled with tens of thousands of believers, people who had come from all directions to perform the rites of pilgrimage with the messenger of God. He stood before them, delivering a sermon that touched on every essential teaching. He spoke of the sanctity of life, of the rights of women, of justice and brotherhood. He reminded them of their duty to worship God alone and to treat each other with fairness and dignity. And then he said, "Have I delivered the message?" The people responded with one voice, testifying that he had fulfilled his mission. With his hand lifted to the sky, the prophet said, "O Allah, bear witness." It was during this momentous occasion that Jibreel descended with one of the final revelations. "Today I have perfected for you your religion, completed my favor upon you, and have chosen for you Islam as your religion." These words struck the prophet's heart with both joy and sorrow. The mission was complete. The favor had been fulfilled. But with that came the understanding that the days of revelation were nearing their end. There would be no new verses after a certain point. The Quran, once delivered drop by drop, was now nearly whole. The companions celebrated the verse. They saw it as a sign of victory and divine favor. But Abu Bakr, among the closest of the Prophet's friends, wept. He understood what others had not yet realized. Perfection in this world often signals the closing of a chapter. The seal of revelation would also mean the departure of the one who had carried it. Jibreel came again during the final days. He brought the last complete surah of the Quran, a short chapter that signaled the conclusion of the mission. When the help of Allah comes in the victory, and you see the people entering the religion of Allah in multitudes, then glorify the praises of your Lord and seek His forgiveness. Indeed, He is ever accepting of repentance. The Prophet recited it with gravity. The words carried a farewell, not just to the people, but to the mission itself. Glorify, praise, seek forgiveness. These were not commands only for the believers. They were instructions for the messenger who had spent his life in service, preparing to return to his Lord. In the quiet of his home, the Prophet spoke to his wife Aisha of a vision. He told her that Jibreel had visited him and recited the Quran with him twice that year during Ramadan. Usually Jibreel would come once in the sacred month, reviewing the verses with the Prophet, confirming their order and recitation, but now he had come twice. The Prophet said he did not think this was without meaning. He believed his end was drawing near. Jibreel's final visits carried a different weight. There was no more instruction about new rulings, There were no more verses that responded to the challenges of the disbelievers. The Quran was now a living book, memorized by the hearts of men and written in the hearts of women and children. It was no longer descending in stages. It stood complete, eternal, guarded by the very one who had delivered it. On what would be Jibreel's last appearance with revelation, the prophet felt the verses settle within him with a mixture of peace and pain. He would never again feel the weight of divine speech pressing upon his chest. He would never again raise his eyes to the horizon and see the figure of Jibreel spreading his wings from one end of the sky to the other. The friend who had accompanied him from the first moment in the cave, who had stood beside him through rejection and triumph, would not return again with the words of God. When the prophet fell ill, his condition worsened quickly. The pain grew, the fever rose. He moved from house to house, seeking comfort, finally settling in the home of Aisha. The companions gathered outside. They were anxious, confused, unable to imagine their lives without him. Inside, the prophet whispered prayers, his lips moving with remembrance. His eyes lifted, focusing on something above. His final words were full of submission. He asked to be with the highest company. He chose reunion with his Lord. Some say that Jibreel was present in those final moments, not as the bearer of revelation, but as a witness, not to speak, but to stand silently as the trust he had carried for so long reached its end. There was no need for speech. The mission was complete. The trust had been honored. The one who had received the word had lived it with full sincerity. When the prophet passed from this world, the earth seemed to stop. The companions could not speak. Some refused to believe it. Umar stood in the mosque, declaring that the prophet had not died. But then Abu Bakr stood and recited the verse, "Muhammad is but a messenger. Messengers have passed away before him. If he dies or is killed, will you turn back on your heels?" With those words, reality sank in. For Jibreel, the one who had descended to earth with messages from the heavens, the mission was over. His task had been fulfilled. The verses were complete. The prophet had returned to his Lord. And so Jibreel ascended once more, this time not to return with revelation, but carrying the memory of a trust that had been delivered with perfect precision. There would be no more prophets, no more scriptures. The revelation had ended, but the message would remain, preserved and recited by the hearts of those who carried it forward. Jibreel's role as the bearer of divine speech had reached its final chapter, and though his voice would no longer be heard on earth, the echoes of his mission would resound through every verse, every prayer, and every heart that turned to the words he had once delivered with the light of truth. After the passing of the Prophet Muhammad, the world seemed quieter. Revelation no longer descended. The final verses had been spoken, memorized, recorded, and shared. The rhythm of divine speech that had echoed through the life of the prophet had now reached its completion, but the work of the angels continued. The creation had not ended. The unseen realm remained active. The heavens still moved by the will of the Creator, and among the most honored of all created beings, Jibreel remained in his station, ever faithful, ever ready. Though his mission of delivering revelation had concluded, Jibreel did not fall into silence. He did not disappear. The role of the archangel was never limited to the bringing of verses alone. He continued to serve in the affairs of the unseen. His presence still touched the lives of the righteous, though they might never see him. He was part of the divine order that sustained the world, watching over those who walked the path of truth, carrying out commands that upheld the balance between mercy and justice. Jibreel had long served as the bridge between the divine and the human. That role, in its most visible form, had reached its end with the sealing of prophethood, but the bridge itself remained. Jibreel was among those who inspired the hearts of the believers through dreams, signs, and moments of clarity that came from the unseen. These moments were not revelation. They did not carry the authority of Scripture, but they carried the light of guidance, the reassurance of nearness, and the whisper of divine approval. In the world of dreams, Jibreel continued to play a role. The prophet himself had spoken of truthful dreams being one part of prophecy. For those whose hearts remained sincere, dreams could become a means of comfort, of warning, of spiritual insight. The righteous across generations would experience dreams in which they saw Jibreel or felt his presence. Sometimes he would appear in the form of a man, sometimes as a voice, sometimes as a presence that left behind a feeling of calm and purpose. These were not visions shared with the world, but private gifts granted to those who remained close to the remembrance of their Lord. In times of difficulty, when the followers of the Prophet faced oppression, confusion, or doubt, many would turn to prayer with a hope that the unseen would come to their aid. And in some of those moments, help would arrive, not always with spectacle or miracle, but with inner strength, with an opening of the heart, with the courage to do what was right. It is said that angels assist the believers in ways unknown to them, and Jibreel, chief among them, remained at the forefront of those unseen helpers. But Jibreel's role was not only with individuals. He continued to serve in the grand events that shaped the destiny of nations and peoples. When acts of injustice threatened the innocent, when tyrants stood against the teachings of God, when mercy was needed to protect the weak, the angels were sent forth. Among them was Jibreel. His presence signified a weight to the moment, a divine attention that would not allow cruelty to go unanswered. Though no longer delivering revelation, he was still a messenger in the sense that he carried out the commands of justice and protection. The day of judgment draws closer with every passing moment. The unseen prepares for an event that no soul can escape. Jibreel, along with the other archangels, plays a role in the unfolding of that future. Israfil will be the one to blow the trumpet, signaling the end of all life and the beginning of the resurrection. Jibreel stands among those who await the divine command for that moment. He will not act until the word is given, but when it is, he will be present in the events that follow. When the trumpet is blown and the heavens are torn apart, when the stars fall and the mountains are scattered, the angels will descend in ranks. They will fill the sky. Their presence will be overwhelming. Among them will be Jibreel, standing as he always has, in obedience, in awe, in unwavering service. He will witness the unfolding of every soul's record, the weighing of every deed, the exposure of every truth. The Quran speaks of that day when the earth is lit by the light of its Lord and the angels stand in rows. Jibreel's name is mentioned directly, confirming his presence in that final gathering. He will carry no message of new scripture. That time has ended, but he will carry the weight of what he has seen. The delivery of revelation was not just a task, it was a trust. He brought the words to those who received them, but he also witnessed how people responded. He saw the ones who believed without hesitation, who gave their lives for the truth. He saw those who rejected, who mocked, who harmed the messengers. He was present at the rise and fall of nations, at the moments when hearts turned to light or darkness. On the day of judgment, he will be among those who stand as witnesses. It is said that he will also intercede, by permission of Allah, for the prophets and for the righteous. His voice, though rarely heard on earth, will speak on that day with truth. He will bear testimony to the integrity of those who lived by the message he delivered. He will confirm that the prophets fulfilled their missions, that they never changed a word, never failed in their trust. He will stand beside them as they plead for mercy for their people, as they watch the fate of their followers unfold. Jibreel's role in paradise is also described. He will be among those who greet the believers as they enter, conveying peace from their Lord. His face will be one of those radiant presences that welcome the faithful home. In a realm where sorrow has no place, his presence will remind them of the long journey they took, the struggles they endured, and the verses that carried them through it all. The same angel who once brought the words that guided their lives will now stand before them with words of peace and joy. Even in paradise, Jibreel remains a servant. He does not seek reward. He does not ask for recognition. His existence is worship. His every movement is obedience. He carries no pride, no desire, no distraction. His honor comes from his closeness to the divine and his perfect fulfillment of every command given to him. His legacy is not written in books of history, but in the hearts of those who live by the Quran. Every time a believer recites a verse, they are repeating words that once passed through Jibreel. Every child who learns to read the opening chapter, every heart that weeps in prayer, Every soul that finds guidance in the scripture continues the chain that Jibreel began. He is not present to hear their voices, but his work echoes in their every breath. Jibreel's story is not one that ends with a single task. It is a story of loyalty beyond comprehension, of service that defines the very essence of obedience. From the first breath of creation to the final trumpet, he remains exactly as he was created to be, pure, steadfast, near the throne, and ever ready to serve. His role beyond time is one of silent strength, eternal trust, and a closeness to the divine that no other can share. And though the world may no longer see him, those who know the story of Revelation remember him with awe and gratitude. For without him, the word might never have reached the hearts that now carry it forward. The story of Jibreel is not just one of an angel fulfilling commands. It is the story of the transmission of truth, of divine speech entering the human world through a being who never hesitated, never stumbled, and never broke the sacred trust he was given. As the final chapter of his mission unfolded with the completion of Revelation, what remained was not only the memory of his appearances but the legacy he carried, a legacy sealed into the words of the Quran and the hearts of those who would live by it. Jibreel never spoke for himself. He never changed a verse, never questioned a command, never delayed what he was ordered to bring. He did not argue. He did not negotiate. His role was pure. He was the vessel through which the eternal reached the temporary. The unseen touched the seen, and the divine made itself known in language and light. It is through him that the messages to Adam and Nuh, to Ibrahim and Musa, to Isa, and finally to Muhammad, were all conveyed. He was not the author of these messages. He was their carrier. Yet in doing so, he became a central figure in the spiritual history of humanity. When people speak of Jibreel, they often imagine his awe-inspiring form, the wings that filled the horizon, the strength that made the mountains tremble. But the greatness of Jibreel lies not only in his power, it lies in his absolute submission. He is great because he never tried to be anything other than what he was created to be. In that, there is a lesson that surpasses many others. To fulfill one's purpose with total clarity and humility is a kind of greatness that the world often forgets. Jibreel reminds us that service to the divine is not weakness, it is the highest kind of strength. The Prophet Muhammad spoke of Jibreel with deep affection and respect. He knew that every time Jibreel came to him, it was not just a moment of divine instruction but also a visit from a companion who had been with him since the first trembling moments in the cave of Hira. He had seen Jibreel in full form, witnessed his vastness, his presence covering the horizon. Yet he also saw him as the one who calmed his heart, the one who taught him to pray, the one who stood beside him in moments of isolation and trial. To the Prophet, Jibreel was not only a heavenly figure, he was a trusted presence who brought certainty when the world seemed unstable. Among the believers, the memory of Jibreel is tied forever to the Quran. Every verse, every chapter, every recitation is linked to the angel who brought it down. When a believer opens the book, they are not only reading words written on a page, they are stepping into a chain of transmission that passed through the heavens. It came from the Lord of all worlds, spoken to Jibreel, carried to the heart of the Prophet, and then passed down generation after generation. In every breath that utters a verse, there is an echo of the voice that first carried it. Jibreel's legacy is not marked by a tomb or a monument. He did not build cities or lead armies. He left behind no personal story, no account of his thoughts or emotions. What he left is something far more enduring. He left the imprint of obedience. He left the certainty that the divine will can reach the earth in its purest form. He left a model of what it means to be completely aligned with one's purpose, to exist not for self but for service. For those who reflect, there is wisdom in his silence. Jibreel was never the center of the message. He never stepped in front of the revelation. He never asked for recognition. He did not seek praise. He delivered what he was told to deliver and then returned to his place. In a world where many struggle for attention, for fame, for validation, Jibreel's story reminds us that the greatest honor comes not from being seen but from being true. The scholars of Islam have spoken of Jibreel with deep reverence. They describe him as the trusted spirit, the one who brought the Quran to the Prophet's heart. They speak of his strength, his beauty, his role as the archangel who stood beside prophets and witnessed the unfolding of divine mercy across history. But perhaps most telling is the way he is described in the Quran itself. It calls him noble, trustworthy, mighty, and close to the throne. These are not just attributes of status. They are qualities of character. Nobility not of blood but of purpose. Trustworthiness not for men but before God. Strength not for war but for responsibility. Closeness not in distance but in loyalty. In the stories of old, when the people of Lut were punished, it was Jibreel who carried out the divine order. When Maryam was given the news of a miraculous birth, it was Jibreel who delivered it. When the prophet felt the weight of isolation and rejection, it was Jibreel who reminded him that he was not alone. From destruction to mercy, from beginnings to endings, Jibreel stood as a witness, as a carrier, as a silent companion. On the day of judgment, when the sky is torn and the earth gives up its burdens, when the people are gathered and their deeds laid bare, Jibreel will be there. Not as one in need of judgment, but as one who witnessed it all. He will stand among the ranks of angels, waiting for the commands of the Lord, watching as each soul faces the truth it carried. And when the believers are welcomed into paradise, it is said that the angels will greet them with peace, and among those angels, Jibreel will be present. The one who brought the message will be there to see its fulfillment. The full story of Jibreel is not confined to what is written in books. It lives in the lives of those who respond to revelation. It continues in the hearts that tremble when verses are recited, in the tears that fall during prayer, in the moments when the unseen feels close and the soul remembers its source. Jibreel is not only part of the past, he is part of the eternal unfolding of the divine plan. His role may have shifted, his visits to the earth may have ceased, but the echo of his wings, the certainty of his presence, and the purity of his purpose remain. When all is said and done, Jibreel is the symbol of trust fulfilled, of guidance delivered, and of obedience without flaw. His story does not end. It simply continues beyond the limits of time, in realms we have not seen, in places where the light never dims. His full story is not only about what he did, but about what he was. And what he was, from the moment he was created until the final command is given, is a servant of the Most High, unshaken, unwavering, and forever close to the throne.